In a small, remote village deep within Africa called Kantana lived a young girl named Akuji. She was special, for she had the gift of healing. Akuji wasn't the only one with this gift. Every woman in her village could heal even the most mortal of wounds with their tears. This made the females of Katana highly sought after by men who wished to taint this power and utilize it as a tool for evil. So, the ancestors of Kantana banned any contact with the outside world. Nobody was ever to leave its borders, and anyone venturing into the land was killed on the spot to protect the village's secrets. Despite the greatness of these powers, it was not without a price. Whenever Akuji cried, her tears would heal any wounds, sickness, or pain. However, for every tear that healed, Akuji would lose 1 hour of her life. Akuji was gentle and kind. She couldn't bear to see anyone or anything suffer. Whether it was a child with a fever or an injured bird, Akuji would cry for them and her tears would heal them. Her father, a wise and cautious man, constantly warned her about the dangers of using her gifts. Akuji, he would say, his voice firm yet loving. You must save your tears. Every tear you shed shortens your life. And remember, never speak to strangers. The world outside is full of evil men who would do anything to possess your powers. But father, Akuji would protest softly, how can I turn away when I see someone in pain? It hurts me to see others suffer. Her father sighed, his eyes filled with both love and worry. I know, my child, but your life is precious. You must protect it. The world is dangerous, and your powers are a rare gift. Not everyone will understand or respect them. Despite her father's warnings, Akuji found it impossible to ignore the suffering around her. The sight of pain tore at her heart, and she continued to heal anyone in need. She couldn't stand to see a child cry or an animal limping in pain. Her father worried about her. He knew that if he didn't find a way to stop Akuji from her healing escapade, he might find himself outliving his young daughter. Akuji knew of her father's worries, so she'd venture far out into the village, even reaching the village's borders. This way, few people would recognize her and would see her as just another healer. One day, Akuji wandered farther from her village than she had ever gone before. She had been chasing a wounded deer, hoping to heal it. As she followed the trail, she got lost and found herself deep in the forest. The sun began to set, and Akuji realized she had no idea how to find her way back. Fear crept into her heart, but she pressed on, hoping to find someone who would help her. As night fell, Akuji stumbled upon a camp of soldiers. These were not ordinary soldiers. They belonged to King Amadi, a ruthless ruler who had been on a mission to conquer neighboring kingdoms. His latest battle had gone terribly wrong, and he was returning home with many wounded men. Akuji's heart ached at the sight of the injured soldiers. Without thinking, she knelt beside one of them, a young man groaning in pain from a deep wound on his leg. "Oh, you poor soul," Akuji whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "I can't leave you like this." She let her tears fall onto his wound, and miraculously, the flesh began to knit itself together. The soldiers stared in disbelief as the pain vanished. Other soldiers, seeing this, quickly gathered around, their eyes wide with hope. "Who is this girl?" one of them murmured. "Her tears, they heal." Soon, word spread through the camp, and King Amadi himself came to see what was happening. He watched in amazement as Akuji healed his soldiers, her tears bringing them back from the brink of death. "Who is this girl?" the king demanded, though his voice was not unkind. "How do you possess such power?" "I am Akuji," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. "My tears, they heal. I cannot bear to see anyone suffer." King Amadi had heard of the legends of healing tears, but he had always dismissed them as myths. Now, seeing the power with his own eyes, he knew he had found something extraordinary. He realized that with Akuji's powers, his army could become invincible. He could conquer any kingdom, rule the world, and perhaps even cheat death itself. Without hesitation, the king ordered his men to capture Akuji. She struggled as they grabbed her, but the soldiers were too strong. She was taken to the palace, where she was locked in a dark, cold dungeon. Each day, the king's men would beat Akuji until she cried, harvesting her tears to heal the king's soldiers. "Akuji, please," one of the guards would say, his voice laced with false sympathy. "Just cry a little. It will be easier for you." But Akuji, weakened by the constant pain and loss of life hours, could only sob quietly. The endless crying and the loss of time took a heavy toll on her, but she held on to hope, believing that somehow she would escape. Years passed, and Akuje's life in the dungeon became a grim routine. One of the guards, a young man named Bayo, was assigned to watch over her. At first, Bayo did his job without much thought, his face impassive as he stood by the door of her cell. But as time went on, he began to see Akuje not as a prisoner, but as a person, a kind and gentle soul trapped in a terrible situation. Bayo had once been a prince in a kingdom that King Amadi had conquered. His family was slain and his home destroyed. He had joined the king's army to survive, but deep down, he despised the man who took everything from him. As Bayo spent more time guarding Akuje, he found himself drawn to her. He admired her strength, her kindness, and her ability to care for others even in the face of such cruelty. One day, while bringing Akuji her major meal, Bayo hesitated at the door of her cell. He looked at her, sitting alone in the dim light, her face pale and tired. "Why do you do this?" he asked quietly, surprising himself with the question. "Why do you heal them when it costs you so much?" Akuji looked up at him, her eyes filled with a deep sadness. "I cannot help it," she replied softly. "When I see someone in pain, I must try to ease it, even if it means losing a part of myself." Bayo's heart ached for her. He knew the pain of losing everything, and now he understood that Akuje was sacrificing her own life to save others. Slowly, he began to show her kindness, bringing her extra food, speaking to her gently, and even telling her stories of his homeland to keep her spirits up. One night, as Bayo sat outside her cell, he decided to tell her the truth. "Akuji," he began, his voice low, "I was once a prince. King Amadi destroyed my kingdom, killed my family, and took everything from me. I joined his army because I had no choice. But now, I cannot bear to see you suffer. I will do anything to protect you." Akuji was moved by Bayo's words. She looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude and something else, a glimmer of hope. "Bayo," she whispered, "I am glad to have met you. You are the only one who has shown me kindness in this dark place." Their love blossomed despite the grim surroundings, and soon they could not imagine life without each other. Akuji offered Bayo her tears, knowing that they would protect him in battle. Bayo hesitated, torn between his love for Akuji and the knowledge that each tear would take an hour from her life. He didn't want any part of it and wouldn't want even a second of her life wasted on him. Only God knew how much life she had left, seeing she had been captive for over a decade. But in the end, he accepted her gifts, vowing to use it only when absolutely necessary. Their love did not go unnoticed. King Amadi soon discovered their secret relationship and his anger knew no bounds. He stormed into Akuji's cell, dragging Bayo with him. "Flog her!" the king bellowed, thrusting a whip into Bayo's hands. "Make her cry!" Bayo looked at the whip in his hands, then at Akuji, who sat trembling on the cold floor. "I cannot," he said, his voice steady. "I will not harm her." King Amadi's face twisted with rage. "You dare defy me?" he snarled. "You will pay for this insolence." The king ordered his other guards to beat Bayo while Akuji watched, helpless and pleading for them to stop. The beating was brutal and Bayo was left bloodied and broken. The king locked him in a separate dungeon, but each day he would bring Bayo to Akuji's cell and have him flogged until she cried. "Akuji," Bayo would whisper, his voice weak but filled with love. "Don't cry for me. I can endure this. Please don't let him win." Akuji's heart broke a little more each day. One night, after weeks of torment, Bayo made a decision. He could not let Akuji suffer any longer. Using his old friendship with one of the guards, Bayo managed to trick him into coming to his cell. "Help me," Bayo whispered, feigning weakness. "I need water, please." The guard, feeling pity, came closer. But as he did, Bayo, with the last of his strength, lunged at him, knocking him out cold. He took the keys and, despite his injuries, made his way to Akuji's cell. When Bayo reached Akuji's cell, he found the guard stationed outside asleep. With a silent prayer, he dispatched them swiftly, then rushed inside to free Akuji. "Akuji," he whispered urgently, shaking her gently. "We have to go now." Akuji's eyes fluttered open, and when she saw Bayo, her eyes filled with tears, not of healing, but of sorrow and love. "Bayo, you came for me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Of course," Bayo replied, helping her to her feet. "I will always come for you, but we must hurry." Together, they fled the dungeon, making their way to the palace walls. Bayo helped Akuji climb the wall first. She was weak, but her will to escape gave her strength. Once she was on top, Bayo climbed up after her. "Wait here," he whispered. "I'll jump down first and catch you." Bayo jumped down and turned to catch Akuji, but just before she leaped, a sharp pain pierced through Bayo's back. He gasped, looking down to see a sword sticking out of his chest. He turned and saw King Amadi standing behind him, a cruel smile on his face. "No!" Akuji screamed as she saw Bayo collapse. She fell from the wall, breaking breaking her legs in the process. Crawling towards Bayo's lifeless body, she was stopped by the king's guards. They captured her once more. Akuji wailed bitterly with the king yelling at the top of his lungs. "Gather her tears. Don't let a drop go to waste," he screamed at the guards. It had been weeks since King Amadi had driven his sword into Bayo's back, ending the life of the only man who had ever shown Akuji kindness. That night, as she lay crumpled on the cold ground of the palace courtyard, Akuji had cried as she had never cried before. Her tears flowed like rivers, soaking the earth beneath her. She wept for Bayo, for the love they had shared, and for the cruelty of the war that had torn them apart. The soldiers had rushed to collect her tears, their greed evident in the way they scooped the precious droplets into containers, eager to please their king. They had never seen such an outpouring of tears before, and they knew these tears were different, more potent, more powerful, born from the deepest sorrow. King Amadi watched from the shadows, a twisted smile on his face as he saw his men gather the tears that would make his army invincible. Yet, even in his triumph, there was a flicker of unease in his heart. He knew the power of Akuji's tears, but he also knew the price she paid for each one. And now, seeing her grief-stricken fall, he wondered how much longer she could last. After that night, Akuji's tears had dried up completely. The king's men tried everything to make her cry again. They beat her, starved her, and subjected her to endless torment, but no amount of pain could bring forth another tear. Her eyes remained dry, her spirit seemingly shattered beyond repair. King Amadi grew increasingly frustrated. Every day he would visit Akuji's cell, his anger mounting as he saw her frail, unresponsive figure lying in the corner. "Why won't you cry?" he would demand, his voice a harsh whisper filled with desperation. "Do you not see that your tears are the only thing keeping you alive? Without them, you are nothing." Akuji would only stare at him with hollow eyes, her voice barely a whisper as she replied, "I have no more tears to give." The king would storm out of the cell, slamming the door behind him, his frustration boiling over into fury. He would order his guards to continue their brutal attempts to make Akuji cry, but each day they returned with empty hands, their faces pale with fear of the king's wrath. As the weeks passed, Akuji grew weaker. Her once vibrant skin was now pale and gaunt, her eyes sunken into her face. She barely spoke, and when she did, her voice was thin and brittle like the last gasp of a dying ember. King Amadi, despite his cruelty, was no fool. He saw the toll the lack of tears was taking on Akuji, and he began to fear that she might die before he had finished his conquests. The thought terrified him, not because he cared for her life, but because without her tears, his ambitions would crumble. He had tasted power, the kind that made him a god among men, and he wasn't ready to let it go. One evening, as he sat in his grand hall, surrounded by his advisors and generals, King Amadi brooded over the problem of Akuji. The hall was filled with the murmur of voices, strategizing for the next campaign, but the king's mind was elsewhere. "Silence!" he ordered. He suddenly roared, slamming his fist onto the table. The hall fell quiet, all eyes turning to the furious leader. "The girl," the king began, his voice low and dangerous, "has not shed a tear in weeks. She grows weaker by the day. If she dies, so does our advantage. I will not let that happen." One of the generals, a grizzled veteran with scars crisscrossing his face, spoke up cautiously. "Your Majesty, perhaps the girl's spirit is broken. She has lost the one she loved. Maybe she will never cry again." King Amadi's eyes narrowed as he considered the general's words. It was true that Akuji's spirit seemed broken, but he couldn't accept that she was beyond manipulation. He needed her tears, needed the power they gave him. He would do whatever it took to get them. "Then we will break her in a different way," the king said, his voice cold and calculating. "If pain will not make her cry, then perhaps something else will." "What do you mean, my king?" one of the advisors asked, fear creeping into his voice. King Amadi stood, his eyes gleaming with a malevolent light. "I will remind her of what she has lost," he declared. "I will show her that the world is still filled with pain and suffering. I will make her watch as others suffer because of her, and then, maybe, she will cry again." The hall was silent, the king's words hanging in the air like a dark cloud. The men knew better than to question his methods. If this was what it took to make Akuji cry again, then so be it. King Amadi turned on his heel and left the hall, his mind already working on the next phase of his plan. He still had multiple lands to conquer, still had dreams of immortality and ultimate power. The tears Akuji had cried that night would do for now, but they wouldn't last forever. He needed more, and he would stop at nothing to get them. Back in Akuji's village, her mother mourned every day, waiting for her daughter to return. Akuji's brothers, who had grown into strong young men, had heard rumors of a powerful king with an immortal army. The story spoke of a girl whose tears brought immortality, and the brothers knew in their hearts that this girl must be Akuji. "We must go to her," said the eldest brother, his voice firm. "If these rumors are true, Akuji is in great danger." The brothers agreed and set out on a dangerous journey to find the king's kingdom. They traveled for weeks, finally reaching the palace where Akuji was held captive. The brothers were skilled warriors and they managed to infiltrate the palace, finding their way to the dungeon where Akuji was kept. The reunion was bittersweet. Akuji was overjoyed to see her brothers, but the loss of Bayo weighed heavily on her heart. "Akuji," the second brother whispered as they carried her out of the dungeon. "We are here now. You are safe." "Thank you," Akuji murmured, her voice weak but filled with gratitude. "But Bayo, he's gone. The king, he killed him." Her brothers exchanged a grim look. They had heard of Bayo, the brave guard who had fallen in love with their sister. His sacrifice had saved Akuji, but the pain of his loss was evident in her eyes. "We will make sure the king pays for his cruelty," vowed the eldest brother, his voice hard as steel. The brothers fought their way out of the palace, carrying Akuji with them. They escaped into the night, making their way back into their hidden village. Akuji was finally home. She reunited with her mother, who wept with joy to see her daughter alive. But the happiness was tinged with sadness, for Akuji's father had passed away years ago, never knowing what had become of his beloved daughter. "You are safe now," her mother whispered, holding Akuji close. "We will never let anyone hurt you again." But as they rested, a dark cloud loomed over their village. Unbeknownst to them, a palace guard had seen Akuji's rescue. It was the same guard Bayo had tricked when he escaped. The guard, eager to redeem himself, followed Akuji and her brothers all the way to their hidden village. Once he had discovered its location, he hurried back to the king to report everything. King Amadi was overjoyed when the guard returned with news of Akuji's whereabouts. Now, he not only knew where she was, but he also knew where to find more maidens with the same power. He could capture them all and have an endless supply of healing tears. Without wasting any time, the king gathered his soldiers and set out to attack the village.